It's a waste to serve a proper meal for a single parent. That's what Mike, my daughter's fiance's father, said while instructing the staff to serve only pickles to my daughter and me. Today, we came here to introduce my daughter, whom I raised as a single father, for her engagement. Even though her fiancé and his mother tried to stop him, this man kept spouting insults about me and my daughter. It's supposed to be a happy day, sending my precious daughter into her new life, but I never expected it to turn out like this. My daughter shrank back, unable to say anything, tears streaming down her cheeks. Seeing her like that was unbearable, and before I realized it, I blurted out, "Well then, your son is fired." Mike was stunned, and my daughter's fiance panicked. Everyone except Mike, who had arrived late, already knew who I was, including his wife. When Mike learned my identity afterward, he was dumbfounded and tried to apologize for his rudeness. My name is Andrew Simmons, 56. I work for a company in the food industry, and my daughter Lisa is 28. She lives on her own and recently got engaged to a young man named Kevin Pedroia. Kevin, a year older than my daughter, works for a trading company. He's financially stable and has a great personality. To be honest, after losing my wife early on and raising my daughter by myself, I was hesitant about the idea of her getting married. But after a dinner with Kevin and Lisa, I realized I could trust this man to take care of her. Everything progressed smoothly, and today was the big day for the formal introduction, including Kevin's parents, Mike and Susan. When we arrived at the restaurant, Kevin and Susan were already there waiting. "It's such a beautiful day, isn't it?" "Absolutely. My husband has a prior appointment and will be a bit late. I'm so sorry." "No problem at all. If he's busy, it can be helped. Shall we go in for now?" It seemed Mike, who would be Lisa's father-in-law, was running late. Since the reservation time was approaching, the four of us decided to go in. We informed the staff that would wait for everyone to arrive before starting the meal. While we waited, we enjoyed some casual conversation. "By the way, why is Mike running late? Work, perhaps?" "Well, it's—" "I see. Sorry for prying, it must be hard to explain. Let's change the topic." Seeing Susan struggle to answer, I quickly stepped in to smooth things over. About 30 minutes past the scheduled time, Mike finally arrived. The moment he stepped into the private room, he said something unbelievable. "Sorry for being late. There was a TV show I just couldn't miss." "A TV show? Oh, didn't they tell you?" I said I'd be late because I had to catch this program. I was shocked, as I had assumed it was work-related. However, I didn't want to ruin the atmosphere, so I decided to steer the conversation elsewhere. "Well, I'm glad it wasn't anything serious. Should we have the food brought out now?" "Oh, no worries. I already gave instructions before I got here." "That's thoughtful of you. Thank you." At first, I thought his excuse for being late was inconsiderate, but perhaps he was just an eccentric yet kind man. With that in mind, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. But then, Mike started smirking at me and my daughter. "Sorry, is something wrong? You've been smiling, and I can't help but notice." "Oh, don't mind me. You'll understand soon enough." "All right then." Mike's vague comments only heightened my unease. Still, I reminded myself that today was about celebrating Lisa and Kevin's engagement. So, I chose to let it slide and go with the flow. It's finally great to see retirement just around the corner. Work is nothing but a pain. That's true. Work can be tough sometimes, but I plan to keep working. Could it be because you're struggling financially? There seem to be more people like that lately. I tried to correct him, but Mike wasn't listening at all. Instead, He started bragging about himself. Well, I won't need to work after retirement. My pension alone will be more than enough. You worked at a bank, didn't you, Mike? That's right. Once you're a branch manager, your salary goes way up. It's the best. Kevin should become a banker too. Hearing this, Kevin gave a strange smile. It seemed Mike wasn't too fond of how Kevin had chosen to live his life. I thought Kevin was doing great, but Mike clearly didn't agree. While I was thinking this, the waiter finally brought the food. I was excited to finally enjoy some good food, but something felt off. While appetizers were placed in front of the padroyas, only a small plate of pickles was set down in front of my daughter and me. I thought maybe our appetizers would come later, so I waited, but then Mike started chuckling, covering his mouth. Are you still expecting more food to come? If so, you're in for a big misunderstanding. What do you mean by that? Are you saying we're only getting pickles? A proper meal for a single parent is a waste. Then he laughed loudly enough for everyone outside the room to hear. At that moment, I finally realized Mike's true nature. When he arrived late, Mike had already instructed the waiter about the food. I had thought it was a kind gesture, but apparently, that's when he told the staff to only serve pickles to my daughter and me. Anger started making my body tremble. My daughter, sitting next to me, couldn't say anything. She just looked down, tears streaming down her face. Seeing her like that, Kevin couldn't contain his anger. Dad, what is the meaning of this? Why would you do something like this? Exactly. This is so disrespectful to both of them. Because they're from a single-parent household, right? Why should we treat them to a fancy meal in such an expensive place? Kevin, you'll be the one paying for it anyway. I had hoped to build a good relationship with the family my daughter would marry into. Even if the other side wasn't perfect, I was willing to be patient. But Mike was simply too much. Even at such an important event as a marriage introduction, he acted like this. If my daughter married into their family, she would undoubtedly face even worse treatment. Ignoring Kevin and Susan's attempts to stop him, Mike continued smirking in a way that made my skin crawl. If a serious problem arose between my daughter and Mike, no one would be able to stop it. Up until now, I had been supportive of the marriage, but in that moment, I felt completely opposed to it. There was no way I could let my daughter marry into a family like this. Even if my daughter hated me for it, I had to stop this marriage. The moment I made up my mind, I blurted out, "Then consider your son fired." What are you talking about? Mike was confused by the sudden declaration, but I continued. I revealed that I was the CEO of the company where Kevin worked. This was something I had already discussed with Susan before Mike arrived. In other words, Mike was the only one in the room who didn't know who I was. After I finished explaining everything, Mike's face turned pale as he realized the gravity of his actions. I'm so sorry. I had no idea you were the CEO of my son's company. Wow, what a twist. In that case, I expect an apology for your earlier rudeness. Of course, I owe both you and Lisa a sincere apology. We'll have the food brought out right away. With that, Mike walked out of a private room. Left in the worst atmosphere, I finally broke the silence. I'm truly sorry to Kevin, but I think we should leave now. There's no point in staying any longer. Yes, I understand. I'm deeply sorry for the unpleasant experience you both had today. You're not the one at fault, but I can't let my daughter marry into a family with someone like Mike. I said this and took my daughter's hand as we left the restaurant. Later, I heard from Kevin and my daughter that Mike became furious after we left. He was shouting things like, "How dare they leave without permission? Don't let him marry her." On the way home, My daughter looked heartbroken, but I think her fear of the marriage outweighed her sadness. Dad, thank you for standing up for me back there. I don't know what I would be done if I were alone. It's fine. Just go home and get some rest tonight. We'll talk more about this later. Okay, Dad, I'm sorry. With that, we parted ways. I wanted to comfort her more, but I figured she needed some time alone. For a while after the day of the meeting, I continued my routine as usual. One day, as I was leaving work, I saw Kevin waiting for me in a sharp suit. I'm sorry about the other day. If you have time today, could you meet with my father again? Sure, I don't have any dinner plans today. Are we heading there now? Really? Thank you so much. I've already called a cab, so let's go. Kevin and I got into the cab and headed toward the city center. It seemed that Susan wasn't feeling well that day, so it would just be the three of us, Kevin, Mike, and me. My daughter had also been invited, but she refused, not wanting to face Mike again. Given what happened last time, I couldn't blame her. Still, if we wanted to move forward with the marriage, my daughter's presence would be essential. For now, it would just be the three of us, but if things went well, I planned to involve her later. With that in mind, I followed Kevin out of the cab. We arrived at a casual Italian restaurant. Last time, you mentioned you liked Italian food. You remembered that, thank you. The food here is really good. I just wanted to make sure you could at least enjoy the meal. Kevin entered the restaurant, looking apologetic. Although Kevin kept apologizing, the real issue was with Mike. He was such a good kid, and yet I had said something as harsh as firing him. I couldn't control my emotions at the time, but I decided I'd apologize later. As we approached the table, I saw Mike already seated. Oh, I didn't think you'd actually come. It's been a while. No need to be so formal, have a seat. Really, I'm sorry about last time. I truly regret my behavior. To my surprise, Mike said words of apology. His words carried a genuine sense of remorse. Seeing that he was capable of reflecting on his mistakes, I felt slightly relieved and took my seat. We ordered appetizers and wine recommended by Kevin and toasted together. Just as I thought the atmosphere was improving, Mike said something unexpected. Being the CEO of a trading company must mean you're making quite a bit, right? Yay, I've been fortunate. Most of it goes back into the company, though. Oh, I see. Still, being a CEO means your future is secure, right? I'm so jealous. While saying this, Mike kept glancing at my face. At that moment, an unpleasant thought crossed my mind. Those eyes, they were the same as before. The moment he realized I was the CEO of a trading company, he started acting like the friends who suddenly cozied up to me, changing their tone. Sure enough, Mike said something outrageous next. Actually, I'm a little strapped for cash. Mind lending me some? We're going to be family, after all. What are you talking about? That's not something I can do. Come on, just a little bit. With all that money you're making, it's just pocket change, right? Stunned by such an outrageous request, I froze. Then Kevin, who had been silent until now, stood up. Grabbing Mike by the arm, he said, "Enough already. I asked him to come because you said you wanted to apologize." What? Why are you getting so worked up? It's just a joke. Yes, a joke. This isn't something you can just laugh off. Get out. I'm cutting ties with you. Mike was left speechless by Kevin's sudden declaration. Apparently, Kevin had been considering cutting ties ever since the disastrous first engagement meeting. Unaware of this, Mike repeated the same mistakes. Cut ties with me? What are you even thinking? Don't be ridiculous. I've already talked to Mom and Lisa. in cutting ties with you and marrying Lisa. And why do you need to cut ties with me for that? Didn't your mother stop you? Kevin slowly nodded in response to Mike's question. Realizing his son was abandoning him, Mike became furious. You ungrateful child. If you're cutting ties with me, that means you won't see your mother either, right? No, I'm only cutting ties with you. Also, Mom plans to divorce you. WTF, divorce? What are you talking about? I haven't heard a word about this. Apparently, Kevin and Susan had discussed it at length. They decided they couldn't continue dealing with Mike. Kevin chose to cut ties, and Susan decided to divorce him. By the way, Mom has already moved out, so she won't be at home when you return. So I never even had a chance from the start. That's right. When you said you wanted to apologize, I hoped you might change, but in the end, you didn't. Kevin and Susan had hoped Mike would change during this meeting. However, when they realized he wouldn't, they had already made their decision and taken action. Kevin had rented a new place to live with Lisa and planned to keep the address a secret from Mike. You're kidding. You're just saying this because you're afraid of being fired, aren't you? Well, it's true I don't want to lose my job, but more importantly, I want to follow Andrew. You're choosing this single-parent loser over your real father. What's wrong with you? Mike's shouting was so loud that people in the restaurant started staring at us. Worried about causing more of a scene, I decided to say my final words. Andrew, being the CEO, has nothing to do with this. The issue is that you're not a respectable person. What did you say? You should spend the rest of your life alone, reflecting on the weight of your actions. Goodbye. With those parting words, I left the restaurant. A few days after the incident, Kevin called me to give an update. Apparently, he had officially cut ties with Mike. While it's legally impossible to sever a parent-child relationship, Kevin had distanced himself physically. 2 months later, Kevin and Lisa had started living together. Since Mike knew where Kevin worked, they were being extremely careful to keep their address a secret. If Mike were to show up unexpectedly, they were prepared to move again or even consider changing jobs. As for Susan, she moved back to her hometown, where she had many relatives, and started enjoying life on her own. Susan, who had always preferred the countryside, found the peaceful environment of her hometown much more suitable. She expressed her gratitude to me for giving her the chance to divorce Mike and sent me several gifts. I've received local vegetables and specialties from her, which I truly appreciate. Mike, abandoned by both Kevin and Susan, remained in the same house. Although he continued working as a banker, I heard through Kevin that he had become lifeless and prone to making mistakes at work. Eventually, the shock of being abandoned by his family led him to spiral into self-destruction, and he was caught embezzling money from the bank, ended up being fired. In the end, Mike was not only sued for damages but also had half of his savings taken by Susan as part of the asset division. He had been so confident, thinking his savings would keep him secure. But how does he feel now? For Mike, who has been fired, his situation is extremely unstable. While I don't know his exact financial state, Susan said he would need to find a new job to secure his future. However, given the shock of being abandoned by his family, it doesn't seem like Mike is in any condition to work. For someone who used to put on such a bravado, Mike has likely only now realized what it means to be truly alone. People often say you only realize the value of what you have once you've lost it, but Mike's realization came far too late. In truth, it's hard to imagine what being alone feels like when you're constantly surrounded by people. Even I understand that much, having lost my wife. Mike must be overwhelmed by a sense of despair right now. While I feel a little sorry for him, this is a consequence of his own actions. If only he hadn't acted the way he did during the engagement meeting, Mike could still be living a happy life. Life can change drastically from the most trivial events. That's what makes life both exciting and terrifying. Witnessing Mike's downfall firsthand, I resolved to face my own life more earnestly. 6 months had passed since Kevin and Lisa started living together, and finally, the long-awaited day of their wedding arrived. Before the ceremony, I had a brief conversation with Lisa, who looked so beautiful it was hard to believe she was my daughter. "Come on, it's not time for tears yet. The ceremony hasn't even started." "Sorry, I'm just so moved at the thought of you actually getting married." After this light-hearted exchange, I quickly left the room as if to escape. The sight of my daughter in her wedding dress overlapped with memories of my late wife. I'd been too busy with work to think about it, but I realized that I still love my wife deeply. And just as much, I love my daughter. That's why I've always tried to love and support her in place of my wife. Now that Kevin has joined her life, my role may be diminishing. But if there ever comes a time when she needs my help, I'll be there to support her without hesitation.